Welcome to today's coffee talk. I'm Margrét, and with me today is a very special guest, Julia Barnett, who is a PhD student both in computer science and communications at Northwestern. Very welcome.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Awesome. So the reason that I invited you here was to talk about a recent paper that you published, and full disclosure, I was a co-author, but I thought it was very relevant to the HR community. So maybe we can just start by you telling us a little bit about what you did mostly, because it was mostly your work.
No, you helped out quite a bit. So we were trying to understand the differences between how men and women were evaluated in the medical field, and we wanted to understand how they were evaluated by patients. So we had over 400,000 reviews from online sources of these doctors. And we focused in on internal medicine and OBGYN to understand how these patients were evaluating doctors and if there are differences across genders. And even further, if a sanction, which is an official kind of negative impact that everyone agrees is an official negative review by the medical field on these doctors, if that aligned with how patients were evaluating these doctors, and taking that in consideration, how are men and women evaluated differently? So we took.
So to clarify, because you know we've been talking about sanctions for such a long time. Sanctions is literally somebody's doing a really bad job, almost might be drunk on the job or just not a good doctor, correct?
Yeah, it's an official reprimand from the medical board. So this is an agreed upon very horrible thing that a doctor has done, and 2 strikes, you're out. You no longer get your medical license after 2 sanctions.
Okay, awesome. So sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to clarify for everybody. So what did we find?
We found, I think unsurprising to a lot of people, that men and women are evaluated quite differently, and specifically women are evaluated much harshly than male doctors are. And we were looking specifically at word choice that people were using, and then the emotions that people describe these doctors with. And we tried to hold it constant within star ratings too, because on ratings you can get like a 1 to 5 scale. So even men and women that are both evaluated very highly, men were getting applauded with amazing words like brilliant, excellent, surgeon. And then women were getting things like, even in these very high ratings, nice or weighted or usual or things like not very. So they're kind of lessening the words even when giving the high rating. And then when you're looking at the lower ratings for so men and women that no one really liked, they're giving 1 stars. Men are still getting described as brilliant, outstanding, wonderful doctors, and then women are getting punished in these word choices, even considering they're the same level of 1-star review.
Wow. And how did that then translate through when you just looked at sanctions versus, or just the small group of sanctioned doctors?
Yeah, so we were looking at a lot of doctors, looking 400,000 reviews of quite a large number of doctors as well. And it's more important to recognize not that many doctors do get sanctioned. So a relatively small percentage of the doctors get sanctioned, but relatively way more men were sanctioned than women. However, when a woman received a sanction, they were doubly punished. They got even worse evaluations than the men, whereas you could not really see that big of a difference between the text reviews of sanctioned men and non-sanctioned men.
Okay, interesting. So then you also talked about that we, especially, so we had 400,000 reviews of doctors across specialties, but then you talked about that we zoomed in on internal medicine and OB-GYN, right? Right, GYN. So why did we do that?
So the one variable we control here for is gender and sanction. We understand when doctors are sanctioned and we know the gender of these physicians, but we don't know anything about the reviewers. You're very anonymous when you're online, and we don't have any information about who's actually making those reviews. So we figured OBGYN with obstetrics and gynecology, we're pretty confident the vast majority of the people leaving those reviews are going to be women. Obviously, there are some men that are attending OBGYN, or maybe partners that are joining for females different reviews, but the vast majority of them are probably going to be based on female care. So we wanted to understand if women reviewing women versus women reviewing men, or vice versa, differs greatly in that way. And there were some interesting evaluations in the emotional side of things. So what you can do with these types of reviews is you can apply an emotional score to the review, and you can review it on positivity, negativity, things like anger, sadness, surprise, and you can understand how at large, these different types of reviews tend to lean on these types of emotions. And there were some interesting discrepancies in how the OBGYN differed from internal medicine, which mapped most of the other reviews that we looked at. And people just tended to be a lot more emotional in general when talking about women. But then when you're looking at OBGYN, people got a lot more angry when you had these lower rated male doctors or these sanctioned male doctors.
Oh, interesting. So with all of that, I think our takeaway was that online reviews are biased. I mean, that was, and maybe not surprisingly, but what made this study unique was that we merged all of this data with sanction status that really allowed us to understand, okay, for truly bad doctors, do the same pattern hold, right? So now, since this is a podcast for HR people, what can we learn in the HR community from this study?
Well, the way I see it really extending to HR is we're analyzing reviews here, text-based reviews of doctors, and a lot of people select doctors based on reviews. The way that transfers to HR is performance evaluations. If we are thinking about whether or not to promote someone based solely on written evaluations, it's important to keep in mind that people evaluate men and women differently on paper in text, even if they're thinking they're both 5-star people. So especially if you're just taking into account a review that someone else has written in a performance evaluation or looking back at your own notes, looking just at the text, you're not going to really have an apples to apples comparison because people are evaluating things that they see as equal quality in different ways via text. And if you're examining them in the exact same way with the exact same metrics, you're going to end up favoring the male candidates over the female candidates.
Okay, slightly depressing. So I think what you're telling me is that if performance reviews are just free text, we are in trouble, right? So is then maybe one aspect or one part of the solution to have more quantifiable questions that are directly answered rather than these free text justification for a rating.
Yeah, and even further than that, like if you are going to rely on text, just to be more conscientious of how you are writing about people, because the reason that these words are more associated with men and women is people tend to use different adjectives for different groups of people. So even just from the onset, when you're evaluating someone, just be a little bit more conscious of your word choice and think about, oh, why did I pick that word? I've been using brilliant for a lot of men. I also think some women are brilliant. Why am I not using that word choice? So just to be more conscious when you're doing your own written evaluations, in line with the more ideal method of having some more quantifiable examinations as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on our video cast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I was happy to join.
Thank you. Bye-bye.